So last year, 15% of people employed in Illinois were represented by a union. But there are plenty in this state who think putting collective bargaining protections inside the state constitution could do more harm than good. Joining me this morning from the other side of the debate is Austin Berg with the Illinois Policy Institute. Austin, good to see you.
Good to see you, Paul.
Congratulations on your new marriage.
Thank you so much.
So proponents say this amendment empowers workers by giving them a constitutional right to unionize. What's wrong with that, and why is that not true?
I'll tell you what's wrong with it. So just this week, our team was speaking to a woman. Her name was Reverend Binion, and she moved to Park Forest, south suburbs, bought a house there for $98,000. The property tax bill on that house, Paul, $98,000 house, was $14,000 a year. And the saddest part about that story isn't just Reverend Binion. There are millions of Illinois homeowners who are paying some of the highest property taxes in the nation. Now, why are those property taxes so high? And that really gets to the heart of this amendment. They're so high because of the deals that are cut between government union leaders and politicians. Those are collective bargaining agreements. Those are the deals that they make.
But it may make those houses more affordable for them.
For example, a deal would be between Chicago Public Schools and the Chicago Teachers Union, for example. That costs taxpayers around the current one in the neighborhood of $2 billion a year. The problem with this amendment is that it gives government unions at that bargaining table unlimited power to demand whatever they want of taxpayer money, and politicians have no limits on what they can give away.
But isn't that the negotiation? I mean, it takes two sides to agree, right? So sure, anybody can demand anything they want. That doesn't equal getting it.
But taxpayers have no voice in that conversation, and what this amendment would do is permanently lock them out of that. And so people like Reverend Binion and millions of other middle-class Illinoisans like her who cannot afford higher property taxes are going to get stuck with that bill.
So there's a very powerful ad that's been running for a very long time. I'm sure most of my viewers have seen this ad many times. I want to just ask you about it. It's got a hospital nurse, right? Male hospital nurse is in it, who says his main concern should be providing the best care to patients, and this should be guaranteed. And it's a pretty powerful ad. What does it get wrong?
It's so misleading, and we actually saw this with the progressive tax debate as well, where it was sort of just the messaging was around, oh, well, this will just affect the rich, it'll just soak the rich. But really, the language of the amendment was so broad that it would affect the middle class and low-income Illinoisans as well. You see that here too. And the big misdirection there is that this amendment has nothing to do with workers in the private sector. It only empowers government unions. And the chief sponsor of the amendment actually said this himself. He said it only applies, as written, to the public sector, only to government unions. They get the power. And when they have that power, that's going to show up in the tax bill of every working Illinoisan, every construction worker, every nurse, every person who is in those commercials.
Well, the organization you're with, IPI, filed a lawsuit against this provision, trying to get it tossed off, saying it's preempted by federal law. That lawsuit got tossed. But the latest polls do show that 71% of Americans do support unions. So isn't it the way Illinois should go, and how do you at least acknowledge that number and give the folks what they seem to be asking for?
I think everybody in Illinois can agree workers deserve great protections, right? That's left, right? Everyone can agree on that. And if that was the only thing in this amendment, that would be a different discussion. But that's not how the proponents wrote it. That's not how politicians and government unions wrote this amendment. They wrote it in such a way that gives government unions extreme, extraordinary power, more than any other state, and that's going to show up in the tax bills of every single Illinoisan. We conservatively estimate that the typical homeowner is going to see a property tax increase of around $2,100 over the next 4 years if this were to pass. That is not something that Illinoisans can afford.
So let me take a step away from the notion of more money and those parts of the negotiation, because the other piece of this is negotiating safety conditions, working conditions. And so that everybody is concerned about. Now, you know, if you don't have this amendment, aren't we leaving a lot of faith in employers to have to do the right thing? And maybe some of them earn that faith, but maybe some of them don't.
Well, in the government sector, we bargain over safety at work all of the time. That's already in law. Government unions are bargaining over safety with their employers all of the time. So that wouldn't really change whether this amendment passes or not. But in addition to the increased costs, we have to think about the other things that could be in these collective bargaining agreements, which would, if this passes, trump state law. So you could have collective bargaining agreements that say, we think this bargaining agreement should be secret. That would trump our Freedom of Information Act law. We could have a law that says, a collective bargaining agreement that says we don't want background checks anymore on workers working with vulnerable populations, seniors, veterans, people with disabilities. that would trump state law. So it's not only affecting the cost of government, which will go up, it's also going to affect the quality of government services.
So I'm sure you remember Governor Rauner a few years ago attempted to, unsuccessfully attempted to curb union power. Don't you need a level playing field of having the workers and everybody at the table equally bargaining?
Absolutely, and you'll see proponents talk about right to work all the time, and right to work is a separate debate. That's one small part of this amendment. The problem, and if proponents wanted to just pass that, that would be a different discussion. But there's so much more that this amendment does. It's so broad, they couldn't even tell you earlier what the effects actually will be. It's sort of a let's pass it and find out later approach. But it's going to have real costs for Illinoisans, and it's costs that they can't afford.
Well, it's going to be a tough thing. We're going to watch it as it goes, and but what I'm happy about is we've been able to provide our viewers with both sides, because it's confusing to a lot of people. I haven't read the amendment.
It's the first thing on your ballot.
Yeah,
first thing on the ballot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Austin Berg with the Illinois Policy Institute, thank you for being with me. Good to see you again.